why our millages have gotten so high over the years. And this is due to a combination effect of Headley and Proposal A. Those two things kind of working together. So what I'm showing on there is, in 2007, we needed 14.5 mills to support township operations. And in 2025, we need 24.7. That's a 70% increase over those 18 years. In that percentage change, we were seeing that go up by 3-4% a year. It only went up by 1% between 2024 and 2025. And I think that is primarily due to the fact that we had multiple years in a row where we got that 5% max because inflation was so high, right? We had the problem, well, it was good for us in the sense that it brought in more taxable revenue. It was bad for everybody else, right? Because inflation was so high, everything was skyrocketing. This is the first year in 4 years that we do not have a 5% increase. The inflation multiplier for this year is 3.1. The next slide talks about how reliant are we on the SAD. And so for the recommended budget, and I'm showing you what is happening in the budget we're in right now and the recommended budget. The overall public safety budget that is in here and recommended today is a $30.1 million budget. And that is covered, 1/3 of it is being covered by our general operating millages. 1/3 of it is being covered by the SAD and the other millage, operating millage, that's police and fire, and 1/3 of it is being covered by Act 345. So those are numbers that are trending in the right direction for what we want. We want to see general operations taking a larger share of it and the police and fire special millages taking a smaller share. And we are seeing that happen. And I think a big part of that is, if you recall, when we had this conversation last year, we have moved dispatch back into the general fund and taken that out of the SAD. And then the final slide that kind of relates to property taxes and assessments is just, again, showing you how the millages and police and fire operations relates to the overall picture. So in 2007, we had 2.96 mills that were dedicated to police and fire operations. And that was 20% of our overall millage picture. In 2025, we need 9.1, which is 37% of our overall millages to be able to accomplish the same goals. One of these days, I'm very hopeful that one of these days, Lansing will figure out a way to fix Headley and Proposal A. They haven't done it yet, but until they do, we're going to continue to have this conversation every year. It's also because of Headley and Proposal A and that uncapping that we have that situation where you can be speaking that we could have Trustee Jackson and Clerk Sanders could be living in side-by-side houses that could be completely identical. But if Trustee Jackson bought her house 10 years ago and Clerk Sanders bought her house last year, Clerk Sanders is probably paying double or triple the amount of taxes than Trustee Jackson is for an identical house. That is the impact of Proposal A and Headley. So now that we're through that little section, before we go into the budget itself, is there any questions about millages? Okay. All right. So everything then from here and out is assuming we're using those numbers from the millages. So the good thing is that we do have a balanced overall general fund budget. That is always a good thing here. I do have to say thank you to Trustee Jackson for finding a typo. And I'm glad it was only a 6-figure typo and not a 7-figure typo. So we did have to make a slight adjustment to what is on here. So instead of having $68,382 left over with the adjustments I had to make, we have $29,750. she found a typo in the tax withholding in the fire budget, and so I had to make a couple of changes on that. Fortunately, on the other side of that, Chief Mansfield realized last week that we were not including the income from one of her grant programs, so she found us 50-some thousand on the other side, so it all worked itself out in the end. Other than that, I have not made any changes to what you were sent last week. And the next slide talks about how the general fund is split up by budget class. So in terms of our revenues, where do our revenues come from? For fiscal year 2026, we're projecting that we will get 51% of our revenues from property taxes. They'll get 26% from state shared revenues. So that's things like the sales tax sharing, the CBTRS. They can also be things like special grants or programs that the state runs. They offer funds back to us. 12% comes from other revenue. 5% comes from fines and forfeits. That's primarily the money that comes in through like traffic tickets and citations and court activity. 3% investment income, and nothing is budgeted to come from the federal revenues or operating transfer in. This is basically the exact same breakdown as it was last year, so no real changes here. The next slide simply just shows the actual numbers for those of you who like tables to go along with your charts. So we will talk about that. I do want to mention, though, a couple things about how have our revenues changed from last year to the upcoming year. So we are seeing in property tax revenue a 5% year-over-year increase due to a combination of that 3.1% inflation multiplier and the renewal of the police and fire operating millage. That was one of the questions that I received, I think, from Trustee Jackson about why did that line go up so much. It's because when we asked the voters to renew that millage last summer, we also asked them to reset it back up to the 1.5 rate. It had been brought down, so that's why it's bringing in more money now. So that's where that is. 51% of our revenues. This does not include the SAD. That is a separate fund, and we'll talk about that separately. All of the numbers that are in here are always estimates until after the March Board of Review. For state constitutional revenue sharing, based off of the most recent numbers that are posted on the state's website, it does look like we should get a 2% increase over fiscal 25. However, state constitutional revenue sharing is not keeping up by any means. Over the last 3 years, we're only having a total increase of 4%. So over the last 3 years, inflation has been about 14%, and we've only got an increase of 4% from the state. The state, some of that is due to change the census that happened and changes to our allotment, and some of that is due to the state simply changing the calculation and formula. Right now, the state, they even did it 2 weeks ago when they had their consensus revenue consensus meeting, which is what updated these numbers. They were crowing about how they were going to increase by a couple $1 billion statewide the money that was coming to all the local communities. The change in numbers for us was $40,000. Like, it just wasn't, right? I mean, for us, it was 0.4% increase. For some communities, it was 10, 12%. So it's one of those messages that, yeah, overall, it's going great. Doesn't mean it's going great for Redford. That, of course, is based on sales tax, and so the state meets 3 times a year to review the sales tax revenues that have come in and adjust those projections. PPT reimbursement, which is personal property tax, again, based off of the state's numbers, they're projecting an 11% year-over-year increase, which is good. But over the past 3 years, even with that 11% increase, it's actually down 10%. And this makes up 3.7% of our total general fund revenues. So those 3 items alone are about 75% of our revenues. On the next page, charge for services.
Can I ask a question on that state constitutional revenue sharing?
Yeah.
We only got like point something percent. Do you know what that was based on?
It's primarily based on population. That's the primary factor that's in there. However, last year, or maybe 2 years ago, the state's fiscal year is October, so that's why it might be actually last year. They kind of changed the formula that now they're including things like what percentage of your budget is going towards public safety, what percentage of your budget is going towards supporting low-income housing, what percentage, like they've added in a bunch of other caveats to that where you can earn like additional revenue. And for us in particular, the one that seems kind of really focused on low-income housing, I think that's primarily geared towards communities that don't receive a lot of funding from HUD for CDBG, because really all of our work in that area flows through community development and direct Mancini, which is money from the feds. I'm really not entirely clear why the state put that in there. But that seems to be how they're kind of modifying that formula.
Which is negatively affecting us.
It's negatively, yes, so far. All right. So charge for services, this is primarily franchise and PEG fees. And I know that Trustee Reese asked, well, what are franchise fees? So on your cable bill, local communities are allowed to assess a percentage of the bill that the cable provider puts on your cable bill, and then the cable provider cuts the check back to us. And that percentage can range from 2 to 5%. However, this is one of those things that even though it's a local thing, it's controlled at the federal level. You can only make an adjustment to the collection rate once every 10 years. You have like a 45-day window when that 10-year thing comes up, or you're out for the next 10 years. And one of the things that hurt us was in 2019 or 2020, we missed the window on, I want to say, do you remember which one it is? It's like Spectrum or Charter. It's one of the big ones. So that's not helping any, in the sense that like we're missing out on revenue because we missed that window and it won't open up again for several more years. The other thing that is really impacting this particular income line is the fact that people are cutting the proverbial cable cord. And right now, the legislation is out there. You can only assess this fee for people who have cable. People who have high-speed internet services and are streaming cable through one form or another don't have to pay this fee. So there is a lot of advocacy going on right now in both Lansing and DC about trying to assess essentially this same fee on like Netflix, right? And or simply even assessing it on like broadband services. Obviously there's a lot of opposition to that, but for us, where this has hurt us primarily is it's not even so much the general revenue source, which of course that's always nice and helpful, but what's really hurting us is that the other component of this is PEG, which is public education and government funds. That's a 2% assessment, and those are funds that have to be used towards educating the public about things that are happening in government. So, running your cable your local cable channel, we use those funds to pay for things like the technology in this room, to pay for the services of the team that broadcasts these meetings, that pays for the expenses associated with like our website and our social media and our, just marquee boards outside, and that revenue stream is decreasing. So we live in a day and age where, if anything, we need people to be more educated about the government, and the revenue stream is declining. So that's what charge for services and franchise fees is. Other revenues, this is, again, like kind of just all the other things that kind of just come in from various sources. The big change here from the last couple of years is ARPA is over. There are no ARPA dollars in this budget, zero. ARPA's done. Interest revenue, pre-COVID,
Excuse me. A question on the ARPA funds.
Yes.
Were there any expenditures that we made previously using ARPA funds that we'll have to jump up and fund from our general fund now that ARPA is over?
Yes.
Okay.
There are. And so that was part of the challenge of getting to a balanced budget this year. There were a couple of staff members that we were partially paying for with ARPA dollars. We were paying for the economic development director with ARPA dollars. So even though at this stage, Director Mancini is doing both roles, we're having to now cover the economic development portion of her position with general fund dollars instead of ARPA dollars. We were assessing a portion of my salary and one of my accountants to ARPA because of the amount of work that we've had to spend on ARPA. So that's had to move back into the general fund. We also were paying for a good chunk of the communications specialist with ARPA, and that's also been moved back into the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Interest revenue. Pre-COVID, this was 0% of our revenue stream, zero. When as a government entity, we are very, very limited on where we can invest money. And this is Treasurer Kavanaugh's area. But through Public Act 20, essentially we can only invest in things that are extremely low risk. So basically Treasury bills. That's basically it. So if the Treasury rate is zero, we're not earning any interest on our money. And because interest rates are high right now, we're earning a considerable amount of money. But I kept it low on purpose in the revenue stream. We will probably get over $2 million again next year in revenue from interest, but I didn't budget it that high. Because while we don't know what's going to happen, everyone seems to assume interest rates will come. And so just as it sloped up really rapidly, it could slope right back down really rapidly. So we need to be really careful because if we don't have those funds, we now have a big hole to fill in the budget. And then fines and forfeits is the last chunk there, which I already said is tickets and citations. It does seem to continue to stabilize from the absolute nadir that we had during COVID, but we are nowhere near historical highs when it comes to this. Some of this is due to staffing, and some of this is, I think, just due to some generational changes in the way that we look at some of these things. Is that fair to say, Chief Mansfield?
I wasn't listening, I'm sorry. I was reviewing my numbers.
Sorry.
I'm not even gonna lie, I was reviewing my numbers.
I was saying that we're nowhere near our historical highs in terms of fines and fees, and I was saying some of that is staffing and some of that is just due to generational changes.
100%. It's a little bit of both. This younger generation is not a big fan of issuing citations all the time. They're much more of a kinder, gentler department.
Do that.
Fine 'em.
That's the last slide about revenues. Does anyone have any questions about revenues before we move into expenses?
No.
Okay.
Adam,
Yes, Treasurer Kavanaugh.
will you be also letting the new trustees know that the water budget isn't until July?
I sure will.
Thank you.
All right. So now we're moving to expenditures. So this first one is a pie chart for you, showing you how do our expenditures kind of lay out. 78% of our expenditures in the general fund are personnel related. That's wages and fringe benefits. Last year it was 77%. It's always in the upper 70s. That's very normal for us. We have about 2% that's capital outlay, 2% that's supplies, then the rest is services and charges. So, like contractors and contractual services, things of that nature. Capital in some ways you might go like, it's only 2%. It's low because the largest capital expenditures that we have are in police and fire, and we pay for those through the SAD, so that's a separate fund. Or it's water and sewer, which is paid for through water and sewer, so that's a separate fund. There really is not a lot of capital that flows through the general fund, primarily expenses related to like this building, the Marquee, Veterans Park, is really the only capital type expenses we tend to have in this budget. Okay. The next page is the table that goes along with that chart, that pie graph. So then some summaries of what changed year over year in some areas. So in personnel, wages and fringe benefits are at 78% of the budget. The ratio of wages to benefits is 41% to 59%. So what that means is that for every dollar we pay in wages, we're paying $1.45 in fringe benefits. It really should be the other way around. If you were to talk to any normal company, that should be reversed. It has been trending in the right direction, but it is still really upside down from where it really ideally should be. And that's primarily due to our unfunded pension and OPEB liabilities that we have been working at, but we still have a long ways to go. All the raises and step increases that are in here are based off of the currently approved collective bargaining agreements or off of the annual salary survey that we do with Romberg Stover. What else has changed? For pension costs, I got a couple of questions about this. Overall, between the general fund and the SAD, overall, the pension went from $8.3 million to $8.5 million. So that's a $200,000 increase, or 2.5%. That is what we would anticipate. We anticipate it to go up. We want it to go up around the rate of inflation year over year, is the way that that's structured over time. However, I think based on the questions that I received, and Jacqueline and I had a conversation about this, that we may explore a couple of different ways that we can look at how we allocate those expenses. But our employees, depending on when they were hired, are in different divisions within MERS. And those different divisions have different benefits associated with them. So, because over time we've reduced, so the person's being hired today is not accruing benefits at the same rate as somebody that was hired 20 years ago. And so what we do is we allocate that expense across the departments based off of who's in what division and how many retirees are in that division. And that's why sometimes you can see these, what looks like really big variations within a department, because like, for example, Division 11 only has 4 active employees left. So those 4 active employees, the cost for those 4 actives and like the 18 retirees that are associated with Division 11 is being placed on just those 4 people. So one of those 4 is supposed to retire this year. So next year, that cost for those 22 people will be put on 3 people. And so that's why it's not really a function of the department or anything that anybody did wrong. It's not really that anybody got more expensive. It's just right now that's how it's not really about the active employee, it's more about the retirees and how we put it on the books. We're looking to see if we can come up with a way to do this that doesn't show that same fluctuation, because I can see why it's confusing for people. But it's not that anybody did anything wrong or anything like that. And again, if you look at the overall picture, the total pension cost only went up by 2.5%. Most of that is covered by the Act 345 millage, because most of that relates to police and fire. I also received a couple of questions that were related to, like for example, in the clerk's department specifically, why did the pension costs go down so much year over year? And that's because both the employee that left last year and the employee that retired last year, because they were high seniority employees, their pension costs were significantly higher than who's working there today, because the average seniority in that department is much less. That's all it was. Trustee Jackson.
But because we start to pay out those pensions, where is that expense?
It's probably, Scott's probably in the legislative stuff now, right? Isn't he? With 12? Yeah. I bet you if I look at, let me just look and see if I'm right, what I'm thinking in my head. Here's the, where is the legislative section? What's legislative? 102? Yeah, so like, for example, former Clerk Christie's, right? So he would have been in the division that's elected officials. So now the elected official division within MERS it's really being distributed. That's why the pension line, like in the legislative department, went up. Because the 4 trustees that are in there are now carrying the cost of the 4 trustees plus Clerk Christie's retirement costs. Kind of divide, right? So it's in here and it's in the general fund like it should be. But it makes it look a little skewed. It makes it look like, well, how come it's so much more expensive to have a board this year than it was last year? It really isn't any more expensive. It's just the way it got allocated across the departments. And we don't, I don't know. It's one of those, we could maybe allocate it all to one department, but there's pros and cons to that too. I don't know, we're looking for another way to do it, but we're gonna pay it regardless, yes.
Okay.
We aren't getting out of that. All right. Next, general fund. So we created a Veterans Park department. So Veterans Park, of course, being right across the street here. And so the expenses for this were being borne by the DDA, but after conversations with Director Mancini and Director Dennis and Supervisor McCray, we really talked about the fact that if we didn't have a DDA, we would still probably want to support having a Veterans Park. And so then really, it's an expense that should be borne by the general fund. It's not really a function of the DDA. It just happens to be in the DDA. And so we added that department, and Director Mancini will kind of oversee that, just kind of like she does with the marquee. It'll kind of fall all within her realm to kind of look over that. The Animal Control Department, I just want to bring this one up in the sense that this department continues to become more and more expensive. And a large part of that is due to the fact that our contract with the Michigan Humane Society has gone up dramatically. But those of you who've been on the board for a while know that this is not the first time I'm bringing up concerns about animal control. And if I go look just 5 years ago, the dog licenses revenue that was collected almost completely paid for the expenses related to the animal control officer herself. They don't do that anymore. And so the general fund is bearing more and more of this cost. And I don't know the last time that we actually considered whether or not we should change the fee for dog licenses, but it's probably at least worth the conversation at some point.
That's something we have looked at, because that was something that we were trying to adjust and potentially, help out with her budget. And our licensing fees are already significantly higher than the majority of the jurisdictions around us. Most people charge less of a licensing fee, but then some of you guys know that recently we changed the fee structure for some of the fines. And instead of making them out of the building department where it was a $75 fine and a court appearance, we've now changed those fines to where it's a civil infraction. So people don't have to go to court, they can just pay their ticket if they choose. But those tickets are now $150. But we haven't really had enough time to evaluate what kind of impact or effect that's going to have on what's going on. But it will also, that money is going to end up going into that other fund or that other line item that you had of fines being collected by the court.
Right.
I don't know that we have a way to set aside and find out if those fines are covering parts of what she's doing.
So that was just what I was going to ask, was where the fines are being posted within the court, what the court collects.
Right, it's just a civil infraction. So without having Mr. Sawicki here to be able to ask him directly, I would think that the fines would be included in a general, it'd probably go in the same spot a speeding ticket would.
And I'm okay with that because it's all general fund dollars, right? So it's going to the right, bucket.
The right pot.
Right? So I'm okay with that. I would be concerned if it was going to the ordinance enforcement fund.
That's what we changed.
Okay,
It
so
no
that's
longer
been
is
fixed.
going
So that's not
there.
an issue. So I think one thing that would be helpful maybe when we get to this point next year is to see Matt Matt should be able to run a report for us that divides out and shows us how much was collected for animal control fines.
Yeah.
And at least then we can compare that to this department and see where we're sitting.
And see if that's working.
Yeah.
But we did look into it, because that's something I specifically asked Officer Pavlovich is about raising our licensing fee. And we are higher than everybody around us.
Okay, then we don't want to go higher.
Really quick comment is also the fact that it has been brought up in the past is that instead of having the discount during the month of June is to have one set fee year-round. And that way, because of the transitioning of the animal control and the licensing, I am supposed to sell them if Wayne County doesn't. But usually Mike Dennis, being the director, he usually tells us what the fee would be. It was John Selmy prior to that. And so I am not opposed if we're not going to have, let's say, the special discount in June, because that's when a lot of people want to buy it because it is significantly lower. If we just year-round have one flat fee.
Well, the other thing that I've noticed is that like this year, we've only collected like $39,000 in dog license fees so far. And
We may be more likely to collect more fees if we lower the price.
that's what I'm getting at.
That's-
Because
that's
even just a few
potentially-
years ago, we were collecting 60, 65,000 in dog license fees. So our collection rate is down too.
Yep.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah.
So-
So if we lower the amount.
We might actually collect more.
Potentially, yeah.
So it's definitely food for thought because I have a feeling we're going to be looking for every penny we can find when it comes to this.
We are.
Yeah.
How much is a dog license?
Right now, dog licenses are, I believe they're $30 a piece right now, and they're $15 during the month of June, or if it's a brand-new puppy or something
Yeah.
like that. So, and literally, the jurisdictions around us are around $10
How often do you have to get a license?
yearly. And to get a license, you have to show proof of vaccination of rabies, which is part of the reason why Treasurer Kavanaugh was talking about in June, which is when we usually do that clinic and we do the low-cost vaccinations. We get a big burst of people that come in to get the low-cost vaccine, and they buy their dog license at the same time. Whereas nowadays, there are other options for people to get low-cost vaccines elsewhere. And then if we were to make the pricing consistent across the board and, throughout the year, we may get more people interested in actually licensing their dog, which is probably better across the board. But that would, of course, if they license their dog, that will bring down the fines, right? That's a better thing. I'd much rather have them licensed, because then I know they're getting the shots.
Yeah. All right, next page, more of what's changed in the general fund, highways and streets. Like I said earlier, the street lighting millage should come down slightly. Trustee Reese, you asked whether or not you thought when we did the upgrades a few years ago that was supposed to be a cost-saving measure. And it is often the case when you're dealing with a utility company, they kind of told us sort of part of the story. So it was a cost-saving measure in the sense that if we had not changed to the LED lights, we would be paying significantly more than we are now.
I see.
But what they did do that we weren't anticipating was right after we completed this, they raised the rates by like 10 or 12%. But if we had stayed with the non-LED lights, they raised those like 40%.
So we
They
got
did it so it would
Yes.
entice you to go to LED, and then they,
An
and all
offer you
these,
can't refuse. kind of
yeah,
thing.
and then they raised the prices
Anyway.
immensely after that.
Wow.
Yes, just mismatch.
Yeah. Just-
Yes.
Monopoly business.
Well, with the rates still going up though, is it something we can, I mean, it's not a lot, it's only 0.10, but I'm just curious, just because it was going down, I just was wondering.
What?
In regards to the millage, but the prices keep going up, I was just curious.
Yeah, but your projection that you came up with and based, we'll see where we're at again when we get to September.
Yeah.
But based on what you forecasted for 12 months and what we should bring in, we should still be able to lower.
Good.
This department also includes money that we receive from the state for right-of-way funds that's supposed to be used for things like signage and, no, am I getting my departments confused? I'm thinking of highways and streets. This is highways and streets.
Yeah, it's
But I
the,
know I talk about, I'm gonna throw it in a different spot. What am I thinking of, Mike?
403?
That's the, that,
Oh, never mind. I got it in my head. I got it. It's a different fund. Okay, here. So he wants to use some of these funds that are sitting there that we get from the state. We have to do some improvements on the Bell Creek pedestrian bridge. Yep. I don't remember what exactly we're doing there, but it's about
Replacement of wood.
$50,000. Oh, the wood. Okay.
sections of wood, just over time.
The other big thing here is we have created a marijuana licensing department within the general fund. We don't really anticipate seeing any sales revenue until at least fiscal '27. We just added a couple license fees in there. We really should be putting at this point a portion of Director Dennis's time here. He's spending a lot of time working on the marijuana project, but until the revenue comes in, the general fund just won't sustain it. I was able to put here the support staff, though, like from the planning commission, those additional expenses are being budgeted here. And then recreation and parks, I'm just giving you the heads up. We'll talk about it more later when we get to the wellness center. But as you were going through that, you may have noticed that there were sections that were just kind of blank all of a sudden. It's related to the wellness center, and we'll talk about that when we get to that fund. Right? Yeah, who's excited? All right, and then personnel, the next couple slides about personnel. So outside of public safety, the only real personnel changes that are in the general fund was that obviously we've reduced the temporary elections personnel because it's not a major election year. We've since learned that Redford Union will be doing a special election, but that won't require the same level of staffing that like the presidential does. We are budgeting currently for both an IT coordinator and the current VC3 contract, which includes on-site support. I've been saying for a while now that I really want to hire some form of a project manager for IT. I think we may finally have found someone. I don't want to count my chickens until they've hatched. But if we do hire that person, then the VC3 contract will go down. So one or other of those expenses will actually go down from what's in there today. And then obviously in the HR department, we reduced the salary line since we are not hiring an HR director at this time, and then increased the contractual services for the contract agreement. In the police department, there's a handy chart there for what the budget includes and the funding source. So police department has staff in the general fund, the SAD, the E911 fund, and school resource officers. So traditional staffing is that we would have a combination of 50 POs and investigators and no cadets. We started the cadet program last fiscal year. The recommendation for this upcoming year is to budget for 45.5 POs investigators and 5 cadets. No, I'm not dividing a person in half. It's just the fact that based on her vacancies, one of the vacancies we don't anticipate to fill until like halfway through the year. Last year, we budgeted for 43 and 6. So this is a move of increasing the staffing back towards where it should be with full staffing. We did that last year because we also discussed using, we didn't adjust the SED, and we took some of that money to pay off capital. Like we paid off the ladder engine early with the money we saved there. And the chief is in support of this staffing plan. On the fire side, which is the next one here, traditional staffing there would be 24 firefighters and no trainees. The recommendation is to budget for 21 firefighters and 2 trainees. Last year, we budgeted for 19 and 2. So again, we're moving closer back to full staffing being budgeted for in there, even though there are still a significant number of vacancies.
What is full staff?
Full staffing would be 24 firefighters and 2 trainees. So it would be a total of 40,
345.
I'm sorry, what?
45.
45 plus the 2 trainees, 47. Yeah, 47, and we're at 44.5.
And what about police?
Police would be, if we kept all 64 POs, investigators, and kept the 5 cadets, it would be 69 plus the people above them. And we're budgeting for 65, so 81.
We're still hoping that I can hire that many cops,
Right.
and we kind of have that little deal, that if I'm lucky enough to pull those out of my hat.
Yes.
One more tickets.
The last slide that's really in here about the general fund expenditures, is just again, look at the breakdown by function. So kind of like where, like by area, right? So 58% of the general fund expenditures are dedicated to public safety, 24% is general government, 10% is the port, 4% is recreational culture, 4% is public works. Last year, the only thing that was different was it was 56% public safety instead of 58. And so that's about the norm in here, especially because the SAD is wholly dedicated to public safety. But the rest of those numbers are right in line with where they would be. And it makes sense that public safety went from 56 to 58 because we increased the staffing budgeted slightly.
Is that for salaries and wages? One of my questions about police was it went up 493,000. Is that because of the projected increase in staffing?
It's the projected increase in staffing and that new CBA.
Okay.
All right, so the next couple of slides are about the police and fire SAD, which is Fund 205. This will be the second year that we are tracking this in its own fund instead of being mixed into the general fund. So within this fund, the revenue that comes here, so I kind of mimicked the same sort of charts from the general fund. 71% of the revenue here is for personnel. Capital outlay is 17%. So I was saying earlier, in the general fund, it was only 2%. Here it's 17% because this is the bulk of our capital, right? And then debt service is 4%. The only debt that is currently in this fund is the North End Fire Station. And then other services and charges and supplies makes up the rest. So the next slide is just the table that goes with that. The one after that is the capital outlay that is budgeted for this coming year in police and fire. So in the police department, we have a need to replace the jail toilets. Every time I say that, that just sounds really kind of funny to me.
And keep in
I'm
mind, those
amazed.
toilets are the sinks and the water fountain and the toilet all combined.
Yeah, it's all that's that one and all in one unit, which is why it's $500,000. That building, is approaching at this point. It's almost 35 years old, so I'm not surprised that we have that need. One of the things that I asked the chief to do this year that she did, and then she had Captain Fitzsimmons go about doing this, was I asked them to really look at the whole building and what they saw coming down the line because it is 35 years old. So they had the roof inspected, they looked at their plumbing, they looked at all the maintenance different issues. And so I was able to update their overarching capital plan to kind of reflect those new numbers. That was really helpful. Thank you. The first floor command stand office refurb. So a couple years ago, they completely renovated the upstairs, but they didn't do anything for the command staff on the main floor. So this is primarily the lieutenant's offices and the command desk, right?
Yes, it also includes like our front desk and our command area that hasn't been upgraded since the building went in, as well as one of the kitchenettes off of our EOC, which God forbid we ever need, and/or we also utilize that for community events when they're in there. So there's a few different aspects to that.
The final thing in the police department that's kind of a combo police and fire project is to completely replace their radios and their preps and the associated equipment that goes along with that and do a full upgrade to encrypted services. So This is, we were offered very nice terms for this. This is a $1.3 million project that we really need to do. The nice thing is that if we sign the contract in fiscal '26, the first payment is not due until fiscal '27. But that's what the payment amounts will be. And so that's why it says year 0 of 3 next to it. So the first payment will be next year, and I'll have it say year 1. But I just wanted you to see that that's what I have worked into their capital plan. On the fire side, he has some life-saving EMS equipment that he is replacing there, stretchers and life packs and things like that.
Yes.
That'll be on a 5-year payment plan of $130,000 a year. The fire engine, which is, was supposed to come this fiscal year, it's just not going to be here by April 1st, so it's being rolled forward the year. They're due for a new command vehicle, which will be a lease, and then the debt payment for the North End Fire Station of $385,000. That line that says year 3 of 30 should be next to the North End Station, not the fire engine.
I was kind of curious.
Why that happened?
Thing on that engine, that's impressive.
I know exactly,
It's a
right?
very expensive fire engine right
So,
I
yeah,
was
so
like,
we're in year 3 of 30 for the fire station. So those are the capital projects that are in the SAD. Before I move to the other funds, any questions about the SAD? All right, then the other funds. So we have a lot of funds, and the fund numbers mean something to us on our end. It's not really important for you to know what those are unless you just want to know. Funds that are in the 200s usually mean they have a special revenue source. Funds that are in the 400s are usually about construction. Funds that are in the 300s are about debt, and funds that are in the 500s are enterprise funds. So those are things where those really, it's the government kind of acting like a business, and so that's why like the water and sewer department, the golf course, those are 500 level funds. So I'm going to talk, I basically have one slide for each fund that I felt we needed to mention today, and here we go. So Fund 203 is road improvement. The revenue source here is the state right-of-way fund. We get $30,000 to $40,000 a year in here. The big thing that Director Dennis wants to do, what?
It's just 2 signs. Well,
Yeah, I know. I didn't put how many signs.
I'm sorry, it just.
He's going to
Sorry.
replace 2 of the Welcome to Redford signs, and he wants to replace 11 benches and receptacles along the Plymouth Road corridor. That's what he wants to use those funds for this year. Fund 230 is solid waste. So the revenue source here is the annual household and business assessment. 2024 was year 3 of our second 3-year plan. So we will probably need to review the rates for 25 to 27. If it goes the way it has been going, we'll probably need to raise it from $195 a year to probably $205 a year for the next 3 years. That doesn't have to be assessed until the fall, so we'll come back to that for discussion at the board level when we get closer to the fall.
Do we collect that one lump payment?
We do. It's on the winter tax bill. That's why we don't have to talk about it till fall. Fund 243 is Brownfield Redevelopment Fund. So the revenue source here is the brownfields. I'm mentioning it only because we're going to see a bunch of activity here as we move funds from this fund to the Wellness Center Construction Fund based on the brownfield that you approved in December. Fund 248 is the DDA. So the revenue source for the DDA is the TIF tax collection, and if they happen to have any revenue generating projects within that fund, which they don't currently have any of those. We are looking to reduce the reliance on the fund balance there. That's part of why we moved the Veterans Park expenses into the general fund. And then they're working on, it's time to renew the 20-year DDA plan. So they're working on that, and that's due when?
We're having our first meeting on it, but it's in 26.
So we're still like a year out before it gets turned in. Fund 261 is the E911 Service Fund. The revenue source here is the E911 dispatch fees that are collected by the state when people call 911. We used the majority of the fund balance that was in this fund to replace the dispatch console this year. We do have a couple of our dispatchers that are budgeted here generally, but really the fund balance now is basically zero. We used it. Fund 284 is the opioid settlement fund. The revenue source here is settlement funds from the class action lawsuits that took place with the tobacco companies. There are very limited things that we can use with these funds. One of the things we can use them for is the social worker that the police chief has brought in.
That's being paid for by a grant.
Right, but I'm saying, but that is one of the things, right?
I don't believe so. I could
Something
probably
else over
find a
there?
way to fund part of it because she does a
Am I
little.
thinking of something else?
I'm using it for the drug disposal, the drug take back boxes. And I could probably use it for Narcan suspension, but we get most of that for free.
Yeah, so the other thing that we can use it for is that because we have a drug treatment court next door, we can use it to pay for those costs. So, and that is part of what we're using. So I have in the general fund, I have a $50,000 transfer in to the general fund to offset those costs for the court. But at this point, like right now, I want to say we have 200,000-ish in this fund, give or take. But they're anticipating we're going to end up with like $1 million in this fund. And there are very limited
Very
things that we can
limited.
spend it on. So it's just one of those things, and primarily because the way that the rules are written to use this, it's really written for people who have health departments, like at the county level, we just don't have that. So I'm glad we found something to spend some of it on, but I know our police chief though.
I was looking, y'all. And don't think I'll stop, but as of right now, Director Bonner is correct. It is extremely limited. There's some outreach programs potentially, but right now we're doing what we can with what we got. I'm happy to hear about the drug court, that they can use parts of it.
Yeah. Fund 288 is Dial-A-Ride for senior services. This millage was last renewed in 2010, and it was initially voted on in the early 90s. My concern here is that, and it just isn't something that we really noticed until really kind of this year because we have not really been able to have full staffing in that department for a long time. But if we do have full staffing in that department, which is what we're kind of at now, that millage does not generate enough revenue to cover those costs. And some of that is because the millage has been reduced greatly by Headley. And so, but I don't, it's not something we have really discussed today. It's just something on the horizon in the next year or two. I think we're going to have to really have a conversation about this millage and whether or not we potentially want to go to the voters to ask them to renew it early. Because if we ask them to renew it early, and currently it's at 1/8 of a mil, it's 0.125, it would be the max. But really, it needs to be 1/4 or 1/2. To cover everything that's in that department. And that's only going to get worse as expenses continue to rise. So we're going to have some conversation about how do we want to fund that department? And whether or not it might be worthwhile to ask the voters, do they still want to support that and would they support an increase? Fund 402 is the Capital Improvement Fund. The revenue source here is board-approved set-asides that fund long-term capital projects in compliance with departmental capital plans. So my goal from a capital perspective every year is that we try to budget essentially the same amount of money every year, as much as we can, and then put money aside so that it then accumulates, and then we buy the large-scale item to not have those ups and downs within the budget. So the next page is kind of showing you what is in that fund today, or what's projected to be in that fund on March 31st. So we're projected to have in that fund on March 31st, $425,000 for IT, $2,600 for elections, $270,000 for building and grounds, $4.2 million for general government, $700,000 for police capital, $800,000 for fire capital, $130,000 for parks and rec, and $97,000 that's just kind of not really assigned anything. It's just the interest that's come because of the money that's invested there. So most of these things have defined things that are going on. So in the IT department, I have been putting money aside because we are going to have, there's two major projects that we may have to do on the horizon. One is that we may have to explore running our own fiber, and one is the cost associated with transitioning fully to the cloud. That's why that money is sitting aside there for that. One of the things is in the elections department. One of the requests is that in this upcoming year is that we begin to put money aside to have the money prepared if we have to replace all of our elections equipment ahead of the 2028 elections. The contract with the current provider, Dominion, expires in 26 or 27, right? And so we don't know whether or not the county will renew that contract. And even if they do renew that contract, chances are high they're going to require us to buy new equipment. So that's what that set aside is for. Building and grounds, that is money that we've set aside over the last couple of years to cover repairs and maintenance, things that come up here like at Town Hall, some of the things that we, like for example, we had initially budgeted to pay for the front doors from here, and then we were able to just kind of pay for it out of the general fund surplus a couple of years ago. So there's just money sitting here. The benefit to having money sitting here is that when times are tougher, and we don't have the ability to put capital aside, there's money here to hopefully get us through that. Community development, this is new here. And this came at the request of Director Mancini. There are activities that we would like the community development department to do that are not necessarily covered by HUD. And that means right now she has no funding source because we've never really done that before. So she's asked if we can begin to put small amounts of money aside like this so that when those things come up, we are better able to take advantage of those opportunities. I'm going to talk about the line highlighted in blue separately. The police and fire, their set-asides, ins and outs are all just based off of what's going on in their capital plans, like we kind of already discussed. Parks and Rec, we have been trying to put every year $50,000 aside in line with our overarching capital plan that's on file for the Parks and Rec, so that's what that is there. So the line in blue kind of goes to the next page, and so that's the breakdown of what's going on with that line. So I've been calling this the ARPA set-aside, which I really probably shouldn't call it ARPA set-aside anymore, only because ARPA's kind of a misnomer now that ARPA is over. So what we did, ARPA said you had to spend all of your money by December 31st of 2024. So we're past that date. Or you had to be under contractual obligations to spend that money on approved things by December of 26. And then while we were in the middle of the ARPA period, they kept changing the rules. And so things that we initially thought we'd be able to spend money on after 26, all of a sudden became ineligible expenses. So what we did over the last couple of years was that one of the things that was always an allowable expense was anything that was a routine expense that you had. So like any kind of staffing costs, wages, whatnot, up to a flat $10 million cap. So what we did the last couple of years was we took police and fire wages that we normally would have paid for with general fund dollars, and we paid for them with the ARPA dollars, and then we took the general fund dollars and put them aside here so we could still use them for these capital projects and get out from underneath that timeline. So that's why I kind of called it the ARPA set aside, but it really isn't ARPA dollars anymore. It's ours. There's no deadline. These are the projects that are in place right now that are going on on those funds. The town hall doors are due to be installed as soon as it's warm enough to install them. The same for the chiller over at the police department. It's just too cold to install it right now, but it's been ordered and it's here. We have this whole list of projects that are going to be coming to you in the next couple of weeks for art to go out for bid. We need to replace the boilers and the control unit at the police department. We need to do the refurb and renovations at the South End Fire Station. That building is almost 30 years old now and hasn't really been renovated down there. We need to replace the boiler at the community center. We need to replace the boilers, heating, cooling here at Town Hall. And we've been talking about wanting to get generators in multiple buildings. So those are all projects that Director Dennis and the other directors have been working on getting specs and requirements and looking at for quite some time. And it's all scheduled to come before you to go out to bid here in the next few weeks.
I see updates to the old North End station.
Yep, it's the next one, yep. So that one, there are some issues there with the cement and the floor and the foundation kind of there. So we don't quite know exactly what we need there. So we tried to get plumbers in there, and they said, or I have this backwards.
Plumbers couldn't get in because the station was built back in '64, and there's a potential area in the front corner of the station where we're not sure how well the foundation is, because whenever we would wash the floors, we'd hit the corner there and the water would just go away. So it went into the ground somewhere. Unfortunately, the gap is too small to get any kind of camera down there to visualize it. So your other options are cutting the concrete, which you really don't want to do because you're going to weaken it at that point in time, or digging from the outside and figuring out what's going on with the foundation. So obviously with the temperatures and the weather right now, we can't do that. So that's one of the kind of things that we're kind of waiting on to see what the best way to move forward with fixing that area of the station. The rest was changing the station where the Parks and Recs is going to use part of that as a storage area for their stuff that's down at our South End station. So some of those renovations have already taken place.
Is that building going to be used for anything else?
Be split between fire and Parks and Recs. Yeah, we'll store some of our stuff over there.
So for storage?
Yep, and then Parks and Recs will have some of their stuff over there as well.
Yeah, it could become kind of a nice rental, event space, too. So don't fully know yet, but that's what he's kind of saying, right? This week with Parks and Rec.
Oh, okay.
No.
I thought he said just,
There won't be any space to do anything over there for rental.
We're not doing things in the bays? I thought we were talking about doing stuff in the bays.
In the bays is where.
Lawnmower and
equipment's
pickup
coming
truck.
down. And then in the other areas, all
Oh.
that stuff that's being stored in the North End Fire Station,
South
or South End, we're gonna move it out so then they can renovate that space and use it for their North End, South,
Gotcha.
North End.
All right.
All the
One of the storage buildings, so that way they
The
can
whole
basically.
north end station is becoming storage for
Everybody.
all of the fire stations plus the parks.
Parks and Recs will park their pickup truck and trailer over there. So in the summers when they're cutting, there's always a piece of equipment there to get out of. And then we have some of our training pieces of apparatus that we have over there that we don't use all the time, and it takes up space in the station, so that will be over there. And then the living area was converted over to pretty much an all storage area. So there was a bathroom area. We took all the plumbing fixtures out, so that way it would gain more storage. And then all the stuff that's in our South End station, which is literally football and Parks and Rec stuff, will move up there and be able to be stored in there. And then we'll renovate that space that they're using down there.
Okay.
Yep.
Adam, quick question, how much is the total in the 402? The monies that are set aside for the 402?
For everything or for this list?
I guess, maybe both.
So if you go back to one slide, or, one page, that's the list, right? So there's
Oh,
there's 6.7 million total within
Okay.
402. There's 4.2 that's kind of for this list.
For this list, okay, gotcha.
And so the last couple kind of related to that, we want to clean all the ducts in the building, so we can't do that till after the HVAC is done. We did an energy audit before. We really would like to upgrade to LEDs in the buildings. Just the HVAC projects took priority first, so that's why it says after HVAC projects. We did put, over the last couple of years, $1.5 million here to help the rec center if needed as it ramps up over the first couple of years, right? Not quite knowing exactly how memberships are going to flow in and things like that, right? So if they end up not needing it, well, then that will be money that comes back to be allocated to some other purpose, right? But that's the biggest chunk. All right, Fund 423 is the construction fund for the recreation center. So the revenue source here is ARPA and the grants from Wayne County, State of Michigan, and HUD. Construction continues. Substantial completion is scheduled for December. So this will be the last major year of activity in this fund.
Is the HUD fund, is that the 2 million we got from feds?
Yep. Fund 424 is the CSO Central Basin basis construction. So, that project shall be starting soon. The revenue source for that is primarily water and sewer rates, and then ARPA and State of Michigan grants. Fund 536 is Minnock Meadows. The revenue source here is rent from the tenants. The planned capital projects over there for this upcoming year is the retaining wall, repairs to the drainage system, the boiler tankless hot water system, a generator, new carpeting on the second and third floors, replacing the balcony lights, and software and hardware upgrades. I have talked to Director Mancini. I would like us to come up, kind of like what we just did for the police department, with a more comprehensive, 10-year look forward on what we may need over there, only because we're starting to see our cash balance there go down. And so I want to make sure that we have a good handle on what is upcoming so we also can properly forecast rent. Fund 580 is the new fund that we have created for the Recreation and Wellness Center operations. So the revenue source here will be membership fees, programs, and events. If the construction is completed in December, we are planning then to be open in January. And so I'm just giving you a fair warning that the numbers that are in the budget for here are not in any way, shape, or form going to be what actually happens. Right? Because there's so many variables that are at play right now in the sense that we don't know when the center is going to open. So when the center actually opens is going to drive all the expenses that are associated with that, right? But for the purposes of getting a budget together, we assumed that the center would be open for 1 quarter, so January, February, and March, and that we would have to begin ramping up staffing for that 3 months prior to that. So we budgeted the staffing for 6 months, but we budgeted the revenue for 3 months. We've also moved all of the leisure services programming out of the general fund and in here for the whole year, so that we don't have to try to do that in the middle of the year, like all the back-end journal accounting, right? So related to that, I also put in a transfer of $200,000 from the general fund to this fund to offset those expenses for the part of the year it's not open yet. When it actually opens, we may not need that $200,000, and it may open early, and it could open late. We just don't fully know yet. Right, but I'm just saying, for the purposes of creating a budget, I kind of tried to create a worst-case scenario of if we had to do that kind of support, this is what it would look like. And I mean that in the sense that, somebody, if say we do open in January and somebody buys their year-long membership, well, they're not going to give me only 25% of it now. They're going to give me the full year's worth. So at the end of the day, this fund is really just going to be about balancing to its bottom line. This first year is just going to look a little strange. We did use the membership numbers and rates that we used are based off of the analysis and forecast that Director Stokes and I did back at the end of 2022 when we first came to the board to ask the board to approve the project period, right? So we knew we could move forward. So, and none of that is final yet, obviously, because the board has to approve all those rates. But I know that'll be the subject of another meeting, probably late spring, early summer, I would think. So she's had George, reviewing like what are people charging today versus what they were charging 2 years ago. And we still feel pretty comfortable where the numbers are, right? But
Increase the family membership a little.
just a little bit.
So we adjusted some of the numbers just to make sense as we were looking more at what a family membership is. There's a lot of moving pieces that are going on right now between trying to forecast out for a facility that we're not in yet and haven't seen kind of that, as well as all the new programs that we're able to offer. And then the big thing that we've been trying to do is look at like what does a family comprise of, like how do you, like at what number are we adding on? So we've had a lot of moving pieces trying to figure it out. So we upped a little bit and then we moved some numbers to make sense more on the opposite side. So we're doing our best guess estimate right now, and then hopefully we'll have like finalized numbers to come, the next, well, we're hoping to like be able to unveil it in like spring. So that's when we had originally talked about that. So we can start getting people, either early memberships or some type of like discounts, stuff like that if they do it ahead of time.
But we'll end up having to have a study session on that topic specifically.
Just a quick question. Will there be like, I know she said discounts and things like that. Will they offer like discounts for people with AAA or certain, or it's just, you're not getting into that?
At this point, we haven't looked into that. I mean, that's something if the board wants to move, forward with, we can. We just didn't want to get too convoluted. There are some out there that are like, you can have a matinee pass between 4 and 7. You can have this. And then it gets crazy trying to figure out how those come in. And then, so we're really trying to just do basic this first year, and then if we see that there's more of a need as we start getting some feedback, then, obviously, or if there's anything that the board has seen at other places, we can look at those as well.
Yeah. All right, Fund 584 is Glenhurst, the golf course. So the revenue source here is golfers. The course remains popular and in good shape. There were 45,621 rounds in 2023, and we went up to 45,876 in 2024. The major capital need that's on the horizon here is that we really need to renovate the irrigation system over there. It's 30 years old. So that'll be a project, not that Director Stokes doesn't have other projects on her plate right now, but we'll have to have experts in to give us estimates on that. That's going to be a 7-figure project for sure. And then we'll have to have some conversations about how are we going to pay for that. I mean, we do have fund balance there, but that's not, I don't want to drain our fund balance in order to pay for that. We could even do, something like we add $1 or $2 to the rounds specifically to go towards capital improvements at the golf course, which is kind of like how the court ended up paying for its new building over time, right? Like there was a set fee that you knew was, this is the court renovation fee. So we're not there yet, but I'm just saying that's on the horizon. Other than that, it remains healthy and in good shape. The next page is a list of the funds we didn't talk about today because they didn't have any significant changes to them, which is ordinance, the accrued employee benefits for general and police and fire, though I do just want to tell everyone what that is in case they don't know. So employees over time, when they retire and they cash out their leave and vacation banks, if we don't have money set aside for that, we have to pay for that out of the general fund. So instead of being hit with that liability all at one time, what we do is every year, we've been assessing $2,500 per employee in each department, and we put that money here here. So then when somebody retires, we pay that payout from here. So one of your questions, Linda, was where did this like $223,000 come from? It comes from all the various departments and all the other funds. If you add those, the small numbers all up together, it equals that big number.
3,000. Okay.
Construction code didn't really change. Indigent defense. So I don't know that I'm going to explain this well, but this is a program that we have to offer in conjunction with the court. That essentially we have to pay for representation, the attorney, for somebody for their arraignment.
For their first appearance.
In their first
For their
appearance, yeah.
arraignment, when they're charged.
So it's a grant program with the state. We have to pay a portion of it, which comes out of the general fund, and then the rest of the funds comes from the state grant. You had a question about that, Linda,
Yeah.
so that's where that comes
Went
from.
up $156,000.
Because we got something late from the state, and so the 1 year is kind of showing 2 years worth of activity. That's why it looks like it jumped so much.
Adam, quick question.
Yeah.
You know the opt-out healthcare that you're getting from those individuals that opt out of the healthcare?
Yeah.
You're still getting money from the checks. Where is that being housed?
I'm not following.
The 5%, I think it is?
The retiree healthcare percentage that everyone pays out of their paycheck?
Or are you
Yeah.
asking about?
You're asking where that is, right?
Well, I'm paying into it, although I'm not going to get the healthcare until
It's all in
you-
one, like mine is the same as yours, it's all in one
Right,
spot.
right, but where is it?
I,
Where is it being held?
it might be on the balance sheet, I don't remember.
Yeah, it's on the, yeah, it doesn't show up on this side of the
Oh.
income statement.
Okay.
Right, it just shows up on the liability side and in the reconciliation for the trust fund, GOPA fund.
Yeah.
So we don't really talk, we don't have to do
Okay.
we don't have to do a budget for that fund
Okay.
because it's a trust fund.
Yeah, okay.
So it's just, that's why we don't really ever, but it all just kind of goes there in holding.
Okay.
And then, right, because it has to kind of sit kind of like an escrow until people invest or moves in there. So it would just
Okay.
come out of there. So it's on the budget is the front end of the financial statements. There's a whole nother side that is the back end of the financial statements. That if
Okay.
you think this is confusing, you haven't seen anything yet.
No, well, you said
So-
holding, so I go, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
holding some of mine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Federal and state forfeiture funds, for the most part, we don't really have, the few things that were being expensed from here, the chief asked if we could move them into the regular budgets, and we did. There's a lot of rules regarding what forfeiture funds can be used for, and the primary thing being is it's not supposed to be paying for regular operating expenses. It's supposed to be paying for the extras or the nice to haves or an upgrade or something special. So on top of that, there is a decent amount of money in the federal forfeiture fund. There's almost nothing in the state forfeiture fund. We don't really, money does not come in here on a regular basis. We also don't really have the staffing right now to be sitting on those task forces either, which doesn't help either.
And I don't anticipate large amounts going back in there at the rate that they used to because of all the civil forfeiture laws that have changed over the last few years. So even when we do reach staffing levels to put people in that task, those different task forces, we're not going to be getting that percentage of funding in that we used to get. So I'm kind of using it as my rainy day fund right now.
Yeah. Which I think is smart. Yes, you can, right. ARPA, like I said, is basically done. I don't know why CSO construction is on here because I did talk about it. And then central and vehicle maintenance, those are internal service funds. So basically, all the expenses related to vehicle and maintenance of the buildings kind of goes there, but then it's charged back to all the individual departments. So the expenses really already showed up in all the individual departments. That's that line, and then that says like vehicle maintenance allocation or central maintenance allocation. That's what that is in your budget. It's a transfer of the expense from here. The other two funds that we did not discuss today is we did not discuss the CDBG fund because that is done separately once she receives her budget allocation, usually sometime in the spring. That will happen separately. The other fund that we didn't discuss today is the water and sewer fund because we discussed that in June before the new rates go into effect in July. I will tell you, just so you know now, the rate forecast from GLEWA is not pretty at all. They're forecasting an across the system average of a 7.9% increase. And their 10-year look ahead is forecasting like a 50% increase over the next 10 years. It's nasty.
Just in water.
Just in water alone.
Is that, but I mean, is there any kind of
It's just their
basis
cost.
for that kind of increase?
They're saying that, this is, related to, some of the operational costs have just gone up tremendously. And then just the infrastructure itself, Metro Detroit region being an older region, in terms of a water system, we just have aging infrastructure that has to be replaced. I believe they're doing $1.2 billion in bonds this year alone.
And then make us pay.
And can I add, they also did the 10-year promise. They kept it when they took over, it was only a 4% max per year for the last 10 years. And that's expired, and it's really taken a toll on their processes. So that's why it's jumping, boom, boom, boom,
We
because
were nice to you for a while, but
we're nice to you for 10 years, now we're gonna
now we're gonna hammer you.
hammer you
Not
for the next
anymore.
5 to 10
It's been
years.
easy to do.
Yes.
It's gradual.
That's what I would have said, but.
And sewer's projected to be between 5 and 6%. So water is just under 8, sewer's 5 to 6%. Just on the, on their side, not everything we do.
Right.
So there's
So people can expect.
President.
Yes,
Oh,
unfortunately, yes.
Water bills are gonna
Trying to keep polite.
I know. Double.
Over the next 10 years, yeah. Because between that and
The CSO.
the continued ramp up to work the CSO in, right? Because we don't have the full debt burden of that worked into the rates yet either. So former finance director John Kuba and I have been working on some forecasting spreadsheets to look kind of at that next 10-year look ahead. And but when we were first working on it, we were not using those rate increases. So that'll be fun. We'll be dealing with in May and June, but just a forecast for what's on the horizon.
Those just came out last Thursday.
Yay.
Yeah. So that's really it in terms of the presentation. Let me glance at the questions that I received and see if I didn't hit any.
Yeah, there's something.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with trustee Reese's. So the legislative category, you asked what salaries and wages that include, that it's the 4 trustees. Okay. We talked about franchise fees, we talked about the pension budget. Brochures, so the brochures expense, that's the 2 big brochures that Leisure Services puts out that goes to every household.
Like the pamphlet.
Yeah, with the calendar and all the programming, that's that. So each one's about $15,000. Treasurer's salaries and wages are budgeted to increase by 50% year over year. Why? They're actually not. It does look like 50% over 2 years, but it's not that year over year. And page 22. So, like in March of 24 versus we're looking at March of 26. But if you look at what we put for this year's budget, 212 to 223, that's not a big change at all. I don't know what was going on 2 years ago, that it was less like that, but we've done market adjustments. So I really think that's primarily what's going on there over the course of 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
The marquee in general, has it ever broken even? Has always been a net loss?
No.
It's always been a net loss. Yeah.
It's been a big loss the last couple of years. I mean, with the roof and capital expenditures, but.
And that,
We haven't put any money into it for a long time either, so it's not like we planned really well on it.
What, you mean we didn't?
The
wait.
roof was the
They didn't
biggest
budget.
expense.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
but, you know, but,
Other than the debt payment itself.
yeah, other than the debt payment, yeah. So now we're having to evaluate and see what else might be, like other things, to look at what else needs to be done over there and when, and that way we can figure out how that process happens instead of, oh my God, we need a roof.
yeah.
Right, so that's what we're doing the process of doing that as well.
And I do think it would be nice to have more activity over there than what we do, right? I mean, there are things that happen over there, but just it'd be nice if there was more revenue generating activity
Yeah.
over there.
What's the cost to rent it, do you know, Mike?
Michelle?
Or Michelle?
It's actually
sorry.
Michelle, yeah.
Sorry.
450 last time we raised it?
I think so.
Yeah.
450 for a day
Like,
rental?
like hours, like,
It's like a 6-hour block.
yeah, it's like a
I think
6
6
hour.
hours off the top of my head.
And then it's another 150, add an hour to it for each hour.
And some people just want it cheaper, and we try to also, you know, say, hey, contact parks. You got to put, pavilions.
Yeah.
You know, so.
I guess I just wonder if it's kind of like what we talked about with the permitting for pets. It's like the cost goes up to generate revenue, but does that drive down usage, you know? And what is, if it is a net loss every year, we know it's not going to be it's always going to be a cost center. It's like, is it just saying we want to have a super active, vibrant center, you know? And so we'd rather lower the cost to rent. But I know there's costs for staff and all of that cleanup, but just curious, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Why is there no projected cost for insurance and pension for the school resource officer? Well, the opts out of insurance. So there's the opt-out cost, but not medical.
One of
And
mine.
the pension,
Married to another office.
That would do it.
just the way it got allocated amongst the main departments and not school resource. And then we already talked about the street lamp. So I think we covered all of yours.
Thank you.
Trustee Jackson's, we talked about pension, we talked about property tax collection, we talked about, we didn't talk about that. So, I didn't really, because you asked some year-to-date things, and I wasn't really prepared to talk about year-to-date expenses today.
Oh, okay.
But I can do my best. The main thing going on there was that we had budgeted for me to hire another accountant, and instead of hiring another accountant, I've had some contract work being done. So the salary, the part-time wages is down,
And this is,
and this is up, yeah. The pension, the clerk office, we covered that.
yeah.
The general government, you asked why it looks like it's $300,000 over budget.
Right.
It's not, that's one of those holding entries that gets fixed during the audit. It's just the expenses related to all the lease payments post there during the year. And then during the audit, it gets properly allocated across and it'll go away. Internet services and the assessor's office, both of those, we didn't do, if you look at the, because you're asking, if you look at the prior year and you looked at where we're at, it would make more sense. We didn't do a good job of estimating for the current year. So if you looked at 2 years ago versus what I'm asking for, they're all
It's about the
right in
same.
line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing with the assessor's office?
Yep.
Okay.
Repairs and maintenance, I wasn't sure what department you were talking about for that.
Building,
But I'm guessing maybe you're meaning all the stuff that happened like in this building and whatnot.
yeah, I don't know, it was like a total expense of $218,000. There's no budget. So I was just curious if those were ARPA funds that we used to do that.
I don't think so, but I don't know for sure which department this is in. So if you come back to me later with the department, you know, if you follow up, I'll let you know. And the district court, really both of that is because he's ramping back to his full staffing and just the new CBAs and cost wage adjustments. Police, that was the new CBA, we talked about that. In the expense, no budget, so auto maintenance and repairs, that is something in the police department that's posted into the wrong line.
That's what I just told
Yeah,
Grace,
so
and I
we'll
bet you
figure
that's
that out.
probably us.
Yeah.
Because we go back and forth between the general fund and the SAD, so sometimes we put it in the wrong spot. We need to make sure. I-
Yeah, it probably needs to be in the SAD, and right now it's on the general fund. So that's the kind of stuff, we would catch it either heading into year end. But yeah, equipment capital, that is the cost for that, it probably won't stay here in the end. That expense is the force simulator. They call it the
What's the
use of
number on it?
force.
The de-escalation.
The de-escalation.
Is it the 150,000? Yeah, that was our VR, so that'll get reimbursed.
So we have revenue coming in to
Yeah,
offset
this
that.
number, the number I'm looking at is 1.6 million.
No, I'm not on that one yet. I'm the 147, 250, a couple lines
Oh,
above it.
one-
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
our
so that's a grant. At the time that we did the budget, we didn't know that grant was happening.
Okay.
So when we do the year-end budget amendment, we'll fix this.
Okay.
Come down.
FICA, that was the typo, so thank you. That's what I was saying,
Yeah.
that it wasn't a bigger typo. The equipment capital, no, this is in the fire department, that is that big SCBA grant that we're doing with the multiple communities that all the expense and the revenue is funneling through us.
And then
So there'll be revenue to offset that.
Okay, got it.
Ordinance enforcement, you asked about salary and wages, that's related both to the new CBA and, so we talked about, was it the plumber?
Yeah, I think it's in there and in contractual.
Yeah, we've got, because you asked about why the overall department, we've got the plumbing person kind of in there twice.
Plumbing.
So that'll get fixed. And then, that's why the contractual services is high and their salary and wages is high. One or the other of those will come back down. Total department for accrued benefits, that relates to that set aside I was saying, all the small numbers will add up to that big number. The indigent fund, we already talked about. Central maintenance allocation inspection. I didn't look at that one. This is in 249. 249, 371, 331. So if I look, Linda, at the March of 24 number, it was 67,000, and we're asking for 70.
So it's only,
I just think we estimated bad in the current year, because we put 45, even though the year prior had been 67.
and the one right before that, the contractual service. It was-
That's the one that I'm saying, we have both the plumbing contractor there and a staff person for plumbing in the salary and wages. So one of the others of those will come back down.
Okay. All right, that was it for me.
All right, other questions? Okay, well, if there really aren't any other questions, the next steps then that we're related to here is that between now and February 17th, I'll prep the documents for actual approval. We're required to have the proposed budget available in the clerk's office. It specifically says it must be available in the clerk's office and on the website for 3 weeks before it's voted on. So once I kind of prep it into that budget book format, we can't really take questions. We're not changing anything at that point. So if there's anything that anybody wants changed, we really have to do it within the next couple of weeks. Otherwise, I'm going to just move forward with what we have today, just move it to there. So the plan then is by February 18th, that budget book will be available, that I will come to the board on March 11th to ask you to actually adopt the budget and hold the public hearing regarding to the millage levy. And then on March 25th, I'll ask you to do the year-end budget amendment related to the current budget. And then April 1st is the new fiscal year. While I'm thinking about that with the budget hearing, I would advise that we do, even though I think it's very possible that come September, we may not see that small increase in the SAD, it would be better to have the budget hearing now in March, assuming we are going to do that, and not have to do it. Because if we get to September and the budget hearing that we did, we'd have to have 2 budget hearings instead of just doing it once.
I did have one more question. On the very last page on fund balance, the beginning fund balance was 23 million. $45,830. And then the ending fund balance is $14 million.
It's because the system, when you're running the department, it doesn't do the math right, because that department head budget column is in there. Just,
So we're going to end up around 23 million
Yeah.
fund balance.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's not the reason why, but yes, we still will. It's because the year-to-date activity, right, we're $9 million in the hole, because we haven't received any tax revenue yet. So if the budget ended today, we would only have 14 million. But once we collect the tax revenue, and it'll go back to normal. All right, sir,
Are you done talking?
I'm done talking.
You didn't drink all your water. You gotta be ready to have a thirst attack,
I
right?
may be ready for something else.
Oh.
We're kind of thirsty.
Good job, guys.
Are there any other questions from the board? Keep in mind that you have time over the next bit. There are questions that you'd like to think about after you get home or later today or tomorrow. Please reach out and send them to Adam so that he has an opportunity to answer for you, because we want to make sure that the board members are as clear as they can be about what they're approving on the budget. So it's important, especially for new board members that are going through the first time. It's a lot to grasp in a very short amount of time. It's doable.
Yeah, it's kind of like a fire hose.
Well, I don't want to think about the
So, you know, funds and numbers, there's just a lot of data coming at you. Trustee Reese asked yesterday how much time this process takes, and I mean, including all the meetings with all the department heads and all the work that they do to put into this, and all the work that Jacqueline does to put in. I mean, it's probably well over 1,000 hours of work that goes into this budget, so
Easy.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yes. Anybody else have anything?
I would just like to say thanks.
Pardon
I
me?
mean, compared to the budget presentations we had prior to Adam, this is a breath of fresh air.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Amen. Amen.
Good job.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Hearing nothing else, this meeting's adjourned.
All right.
Good job, all.